I always believed that when the worst happened, family would show up. That blood meant loyalty, and loyalty meant help, especially when a child's life was on the line. But I was wrong, dead wrong. When my daughter Sophie was rushed into the ER with a fractured spine and the clock ticking on a high-stakes surgery, I made one phone call I thought would change everything. It did, but not the way I imagined. My parents refused to co-sign the emergency loan, then boarded a plane to Maui with my sister and her kids for a 14-0 vacation. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I stared at the hospital walls for 5 minutes. Then I picked up the phone and started calling strangers. That was the moment my family changed. That was the moment I realized, some people raise you, but they were never truly your people. And 2 weeks later, they were standing in court. It started with a phone call I'll never forget. Sophie was supposed to be home an hour ago, but instead, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. A nurse's voice, professional, calm, but hurried, told me my daughter had been in an accident. She was conscious, stable, but they needed me at the hospital immediately. I drove like a ghost. No music, no tears, just white knuckles on the steering wheel and the sound of my own heartbeat. When I saw her, everything inside me collapsed and rebuilt itself at once. Sophie was strapped to a stretcher, her face pale and scraped. A doctor stood nearby with a clipboard and a look I've come to hate, the look of someone about to give you 2 terrible options and ask you to pick one. They had run scans. Sophie had a spinal fracture. No paralysis yet, but a high risk if we waited. There were 2 surgeries available. One was newer, far safer, with a 98% success rate, minimally invasive, almost no nerve risk. The other was older, cheaper, and covered by insurance, but had a 20% higher chance of permanent damage. I didn't even blink. "We'll do the first one," I told him. He nodded, almost relieved. "Good choice, but the timing is tight. The inflammation stage gives us an advantage if we go in tomorrow." Less than 24 hours. That's how long I had to come up with the money. I wasn't panicking, not yet. I had a plan. I had always been the responsible one, the saver, the quiet storm. I stepped into the hallway, pulled out my phone, and called the only people who should have dropped everything, my parents. "Hey kiddo," my dad answered. "Everything okay?" I swallowed. "No, not really. Sophie needs surgery. There's a version that gives her the best chance of full recovery, but it's expensive. I need your help." There was a pause, a long one. Then, slowly, "Are you sure it's not covered?" I explained everything. The risks, the urgency, the doctor's recommendation. I wasn't asking for a blank check, just help covering the difference. We had to lock it in by end of day. That's when I heard my mother's voice come onto speaker. Calm, polite, detached. "Have you double-checked with the insurance? Sometimes they say no up front, but if you push." "I have, Mom. It's not on their list. It's new. We don't have time." More silence. Then my dad cleared his throat. "It's just, the timing's tricky. You know we're leaving Monday." "Leaving?" "For the Hawaii trip," Mom chimed in. "We already paid in full. It's non-refundable after the 7-day mark." That's when the pit opened in my stomach. That's when I realized I wasn't talking to family, I was talking to customers, calculating sunk costs. "Dad, please don't tell me my daughter's spine is less important than a hotel reservation." "You're being emotional," Mom said softly. "And I get it, but you shouldn't make big financial decisions in this state, especially with your job being what it is." My job, my 2 jobs, the ones that helped them pay off their mortgage, the ones that never let Sophie go without, the ones they'd never once acknowledged. So I asked them plainly, "Is the answer no?" Another pause. Then my mother, almost whispering, "We're just not in a position to take that kind of financial hit right now." Got it. I hung up. And for the first time in my adult life, I stopped making excuses for them. I didn't cry. I sat on the cold plastic chair outside the surgical ward and stared at a vending machine like it might give me an answer instead of a stale granola bar. I tried to slow my breathing, tried not to scream at the world or throw my phone at the linoleum floor. Instead, I clenched my jaw so tight I thought I might crack a molar. My daughter could lose her ability to walk, and my parents were sipping early check-in champagne in their heads already. But I still had one option left: an emergency medical loan. I opened my laptop and started filling out the forms. Click here to accept the interest rate. Click here to acknowledge the risk. Click here if you've run out of people to count on. I was approved, but only for part of the amount. Without a cosigner, they couldn't release the full sum. The clock was ticking. I had maybe 6 hours to secure the rest. I took a breath I didn't feel. Then I made the call I swore I wouldn't make again. My dad answered. "Hey," I said quietly. "It's me. I found a loan, but I need a cosigner to unlock the full amount. You wouldn't have to pay anything, it's just your name." Pause. Always with the pauses. "We talked it over," he said finally. "And we're not comfortable tying our names to anything financial right now. With all the uncertainty, you understand." "Uncertainty?" I repeated. "You mean like your granddaughter's spinal cord?" "It's not that simple," he said. "It actually is," I said flatly. "It's a bank, it's legal, it's time, sensitive, and I'm not asking you to drain your savings, just sign a form." "I've had identity theft in the past," he added. I didn't even reply. I just said, "Thanks anyway," and hung up. This time, I didn't sit down. Something in me had shifted. The grief was still there, but it was hollowed out by something colder, sharper. I wasn't just a mom in crisis anymore. I was a woman with nothing left to lose and a daughter to protect. You know that moment when your entire memory replays itself differently? Like suddenly all the red flags you ignored start lining up like runway lights? That was me, pacing the hospital hallway, seeing my childhood for what it really was. My parents didn't change. I just stopped lying to myself. I used to think I came from a normal family. Maybe not warm but decent, middle class, private school ethics with budget vacation values. But really what we had were rules. Don't cry in public. Don't talk back. Don't expect praise for doing the right thing. Especially that last one. "You don't get a trophy for being decent," my dad used to say, which was rich coming from a man who once cried because the steak at his birthday dinner was overcooked. I was the firstborn, the test run. When Alyssa came along, I became the backdrop to her spotlight. She got new clothes, a Disney-themed bedroom, a dance coach. I got hand-me-downs and a speech about gratitude. She got a sweet 16 party. I got a gas station cupcake and a reminder that not everyone's lucky enough to have family. Lucky. I laughed out loud in the hospital hallway at the memory. A passing nurse looked over. I waved it off. I'd spent my whole life playing the responsible daughter, quiet, helpful, low maintenance. I helped with bills. I showed up for holidays. I never asked for anything. Until now. And now, I was being told my emergency was too risky for them. So I stopped asking. And I started preparing to survive without them. That night, while Sophie slept under soft lighting and a cocktail of pain medication, I sat beside her, watching her chest rise and fall. 1,000 memories pressed down on me like brick sheavy, undeniable, and strangely sharp now that I had stopped excusing them. My parents had never really chosen me. They had tolerated me, yes, smiled for photos, attended the occasional school recital with the obligatory flowers and side glances at their watches. But love? That kind that makes you sacrifice? That makes you show up? That was reserved for my sister, Alyssa. Alyssa was the golden child, 2 years younger, always the one who just had a softer personality, according to Mom. I was too sensitive, too serious, too much. When Alyssa wanted ballet lessons, she got a private coach and new slippers. When I wanted to try violin, I got a secondhand instrument and a reminder that we couldn't afford whims. Alyssa got birthday parties, cupcakes from the boutique bakery, a canopy bed with glittery lights. I got chores and lectures, always, Always lectures. One year, when I asked why she got a new Barbie and mine had a missing foot, Mom said, "Well, we're in a better place financially now." As if 2 years had rewritten our economic DNA. I thought maybe things would change when I went to college. I worked 2 jobs to get through, still called home every Sunday, still showed up for Thanksgiving with a pie in hand and a polite smile. But it didn't matter. Then I got pregnant at 20. Sophie's dad was a mistake-a, fast-talking burnout with a controlling streak. When I finally left him, I was proud of myself. I thought, maybe now, my parents would see me differently. Strong, brave, worthy. Instead, my mom asked if I was planning to move back in. When I said no, she actually looked relieved. They never offered help, never babysat, never asked how I was managing with 2 part-time jobs and a toddler. They just hovered on the sidelines, arms crossed, as if I'd embarrassed them in front of no one. I kept showing up anyway. I sent them money when Dad's back surgery bill came. I helped cover a gap in their mortgage after retirement. I didn't track what I gave. I just told myself, this is what family does. But Alyssa never had to give. Her kids, my nieces and nephew, had everything. Laptops by middle school, ski trips in Aspen, a trampoline sunk into their backyard. Who the hell installs a sunken trampoline? Then came Grandma Edith. She was different. Edith Monroe, my mother's mother, was the only one who ever looked at Sophie and saw her brilliance. They bonded over puzzles and numbers. Grandma had been a statistics professor at Portland State, and she'd sit with Sophie for hours doing money games, basically compound interest lessons disguised as Monopoly. I never understood them, but I was glad they had each other. When Grandma died, I assumed the estate went to my parents. They didn't mention a will, just said, everything's handled. Suddenly, they were flush with cash, trips to Europe, a kitchen remodel, a new car for Alyssa's oldest, and not a starter Cara luxury SUV with a big red bow like we were in a dealership commercial. I didn't ask questions. I should have. But I let it go because I didn't want to seem greedy, ungrateful, dramatic. Now, sitting in that hospital chair with my daughter's life on the line and my bank account nearly drained, I realized maybe I wasn't the one being dramatic. Maybe they were just cruel in slow motion, and I had finally slowed down enough to see it. I remember the moment I decided to stop dialing numbers that shared my DNA. My thumb hovered over my contact list, pausing on my aunt's name, then sliding past it. No more begging people who thought love was conditional. Instead, I scrolled to someone I barely knew, Tracy Bell, the mother of Sophie's friend from theater club. We'd only ever chatted briefly at intermissions, but she seemed kind, steady. I didn't even know if she'd remember me. I called anyway. "Hi, this is Helen, Sophie's mama, from the school musical. I know this is weird, but Sophie's in the hospital, and we need help with a surgery. I'm sorry to ask this, but would you be willing to—" I didn't even finish. "Yes," she said, no hesitation. "Tell me where to send it." It stunned me. Like a window opened in a room I didn't know was suffocating me. After that, something clicked. A fire I didn't know I had began to burn. I called Sophie's old violin teacher, a woman in her 70s who once taught free lessons on Saturdays. She said, "I'll send what I can from my pension." Sophie always reminded me of my niece. I called a guy I hadn't seen in a decade, someone I'd trained in a temp job years ago. He Venmo'd me $300 and left a note, "For Sophie, don't worry about it." A retired neighbor dropped off a bag with snacks, toothbrushes, and a folded tifty tucked inside a sympathy card. None of these people owed me anything. They didn't owe Sophie anything. But they showed up anyway. I'd always imagined kindness as something warm and fuzzy. This wasn't. It was raw, awkward, humbling. It felt like standing naked in the middle of a street and watching strangers hand you their jackets. I broke down in the hospital bathroom after the 5th call. Not because of the money, but because these were not the people I'd spent my life helping. These weren't the ones I'd called during emergencies. They weren't the ones whose bills I'd quietly paid when they forgot their credit card. And yet they were doing more for Sophie in one day than my parents had done in 18 years. Every call became an act of rebellion. Every donation a slap in the face to the people who said, "We just can't help right now." I started tracking it all in a spreadsheet half, so I could eventually pay everyone back. Have to remind myself I wasn't crazy, that we were worth fighting for. Then, something happened that knocked the breath out of me. Sophie's best friend walked into the hospital room with her mom. Her mom didn't say a word, just reached into her purse and handed me a credit card. 20. Zero limit, she said. Use what you need. I started shaking. I can't interest rates, repayments, I don't even. She held up a hand. You're a good mom, she said. Let people be good to you. I didn't even know what to say. I just nodded, my throat thick. With that, the surgery was fully funded, paid for. In full, in cash. I signed the consent forms with a borrowed pen and a trembling hand. Sophie was prepped and wheeled into the OR, surrounded by one of the best spinal teams in the Pacific Northwest. And still not a word from my parents. No text, no call, no apology. But by then, I didn't need it. Because I finally understood something I'd never dared admit out loud. The people who share your blood aren't always your family. Sometimes, family is the one who answers at intermission, the one who hands you their credit card, the one who says, yes, before you even finish the question. 3 days after Sophie's surgery, while she was still sleeping off the pain meds and the swelling was finally starting to go down, my phone rang again. Unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't answer. I was exhausted physically, emotionally, spiritually, but something in me said pick up. Hello? Helen? This is Thomas Reed. I'm sorry, I used to work with your grandmother Edith. I was her estate attorney. I froze. I heard what happened with Sophie, he continued. I'm so sorry, but I need to ask, did Sophie ever receive her inheritance? My brain stuttered. Inheritance? Yes, he said, confused. Your grandmother left everything to her. I assumed by now it had been transferred. No, I said slowly, standing up, suddenly cold all over. No one ever told us anything. My parents handled the estate. There was a long silence on his end. Then a sharp exhale. Oh God, he muttered. What? I asked, heart pounding. Helen, I was the one who wrote the will. It's all in black and white. Edith created a trust. Sophie was the sole beneficiary. Your parents were just temporary trustees until she turned 18. She turned 18 2 months ago, I whispered. They should have notified the bank, he said. They should have filed the transfer paperwork. They were legally obligated to. I sat down hard in the hospital chair, trying to process what he was saying. They didn't just refuse to help, I said. They used her money. Yes, he said grimly. If they spent any of it, that's not just unethical. That's theft. The world tilted. Suddenly, everything clicked: the sudden luxury cruises, the designer handbags, the brand new car Alyssa's son received for graduation, the remodel, the spa weekends. The vague "it's handled" they offered when Grandma passed. They hadn't just failed Sophie. They'd robbed her. And they did it quietly, confident that I wouldn't question, that I wouldn't push, that I'd just keep playing the role they'd written for me, the quiet, capable daughter who never made a scene. Well, scene coming. I hung up and stared at the wall in front of me. Sophie was still asleep, her hand curled loosely against the blanket. I reached for it, held it in mine. That money was meant for her, for college, for a future, for safety nets we'd never had. And instead, it had been funneled into Ocean View suites and sun hats and whatever else my parents thought they were owed. I stayed silent for a long time. Then I stood up, walked to the window, and let myself feel it, not just the betrayal, but the rage underneath it, the hot, shaking, white-hot injustice that had been simmering for years. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about a pattern. A lifelong pattern of my parents treating Sophie like an afterthought, of treating me like a footnote. Of rewriting the story of our family in a way that erased us quietly, legally, politely, but they had underestimated one thing. I wasn't afraid of being loud anymore. Not after that second no. Not after watching strangers do more for my daughter in 48 hours than my parents had in 18 years. I picked up my phone again and called Thomas back. "Tell me everything," I said. "And tell me how we take it back." 2 weeks after the surgery, Sophie and I sat in my car, parked across the street from my parents' house. The afternoon sun burned low, casting long shadows across the suburban lawn where I used to ride my bike. That day, I wasn't holding handlebars, I was holding an envelope. Inside it was everything: the will, the financial statements, the trust violation notice, and a lawsuit with their names printed in bold letters. Sophie was in the passenger seat, legs braced, earbuds in. She didn't ask questions. She knew why we were there. "I don't want to talk to them," she said without looking up. "You won't have to," I replied. She nodded, then murmured, "Good." 10 minutes later, their car pulled into the driveway. My mother stepped out first, wearing a flowy white sundress and oversized sunglasses. She looked like a postcard from someone else's life. My father followed, tugging a luggage bag that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Neither of them saw us. Until I opened the door and stepped out. My heels crunched against the driveway gravel. My mother froze mid-step, eyes narrowing, as if my presence was an inconvenience she hadn't scheduled. "What's this?" she asked when she saw the envelope in my hand. I smiled, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. "You've been served." She blinked. "Excuse me?" My father looked up from the trunk, his face going slack. "You're joking," he said, but his voice cracked halfway through the sentence. I didn't say a word. I turned, walked back to my car, and got in. Behind me, I heard her yell my name. I heard him say something like, "Wait, we don't have to do this." But we did. I had to. For Sophie. For every ignored phone call. For every quiet insult disguised as advice. For every dollar they took while pretending we were a family. I didn't even flinch when my mom called 6 times that night. I let them sit with it. Let them sweat. Let them scramble. Because this time, I was in control. The civil trial began a few months later. Sophie, now fully recovered, sat beside me in court. Calm, composed. A woman forged in silence, and sharpened by truth. My parents showed up with a lawyer who looked like he got paid by the syllable. He smiled too much and used phrases like disproportionate bequest and questionable testamentary capacity. Translation? Edith was confused. Sophie had no right to be sole heir. Nice try. Thomas didn't even raise his voice. He let the paper trail do the talking. Bank records, dated emails, notarized copies of the will. Grandma had written multiple times that Sophie reminded her of herself. One note ended with, "She's the only one who listens when I talk about compound interest. That alone deserves a fortune." Their lawyer tried to argue my parents were holding the money temporarily. Then Thomas showed the purchase receipts, cruises, home renovations, car gifts. Not a single effort to inform Sophie or initiate the legal transfer. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of pages turning and dignity collapsing. At one point, the judge had to ask for silence twice. Once because my parents were whispering furiously. Once because Sophie laughed under her breath. The ruling? Immediate repayment of all funds, breach of fiduciary duty, misuse of trust assets, violation of ethical and legal standing. But the kicker? They didn't have the money anymore. They'd spent a good portion of it, and their remaining assets couldn't cover the full judgment. So the court seized everything. The house, the car, the retirement account, the beach condo they never invited me to. Even the antique pearl necklace my mother once told me I'd never be classy enough to inherit. I didn't cheer. I didn't smirk. I watched them walk out of the courthouse like stranger shriveled versions of the people who once told me I was too dramatic, too sensitive, too much. And for the first time in my life, I felt exactly enough. That night, Sophie sat beside me at our kitchen table, reading the final judgment papers. She didn't cry, she didn't celebrate. They didn't just steal money, she said quietly. They gambled with my life. She was right. And now, it was time they faced what they'd spent decades avoiding. Consequences. A week after the ruling, I thought it was over. The assets were frozen, the judgment handed down, and my parents were quieterly so. Then Thomas called. "You sitting down?" he asked. I was, but I braced myself anyway. "They tried to move funds," he said. "Accounts they didn't disclose during discovery. Offshore, under your aunt's name." My stomach dropped. "You're kidding." He wasn't. The digital trail was clear. Sloppy, even. Money rerouted through shallow shell accounts and an e-wallet linked to an email my father once used for fantasy football. It was blatant, dumb, and a violation of the court order. "We're filing again," Thomas said. "This time, it won't be civil." Within 3 weeks, my parents were back in court. But this time, there were no expensive suits. No smug lawyer in a designer tie. They showed up in the same neon orange vests they'd been wearing for court-mandated community service, an ironic costume for what came next. Fraud, attempt to conceal assets, violation of trust enforcement. The judge didn't even blink. "This isn't a mistake," he said. "This is deliberate deception," after a court ruling. My mother didn't say a word. My father didn't make eye contact. Their new attorney didn't smile. And then came the sentence: 12 months of actual prison time. No suspended sentence, no parole recommendation, no exceptions based on age. They were handcuffed right there in the courtroom. No one cried. No one gasped. Just the quiet click of metal against skin and the shuffle of their once proud steps heading toward accountability. Sophie and I didn't stay for the transfer van. We walked out into the crisp Oregon air, the wind cool against our faces, and for the first time in what felt like forever, my chest didn't feel like a cage. But that wasn't the end. Because with public records come public consequences. The case hit the local news first, then financial blogs, and then, somehow, national attention. A story of a stolen trust fund, a betrayed granddaughter, and a mother who refused to stay silent. Someone dug up a photo of my mom picking up trash by the freeway. She looked furious, like the empty fast food cup she was holding had personally insulted her. My father, next to her, looked hollow, like a man who once thought he'd always get away with things just by being quiet. We didn't share the photos, but we saw them. And we saved them not for vengeance, but as reminders. Sophie received what was left of the inheritance after the second ruling. It wasn't everything. They had squandered too much, but it was enough. She paid off her medical bills, set aside tuition for college, and then, without asking me, opened her own investment account. She called it the compound projecta, nod to Grandma Edith, and the afternoons they used to spend calculating interest and drawing charts on scratch paper. When I asked her what she planned to do with it, she just smiled. "It's not for now," she said. "It's for something good later." I could have cried, but I didn't. Because this was what healing looked like. Not perfection, not erasing the past, but building something new on solid ground. Months later, after the final checks had cleared, after the court papers were filed and the last lawyer's email tucked into an overstuffed folder, Sophie handed me something. A black binder. Neatly labeled, alphabetized, every record from the case. Bank statements, affidavits, signed court orders. Even the original scanned copy of Grandma Edith's will. "Keep it," she said. "We might not need it again, but if we do, I want it all in one place." She had inherited more than just a trust fund. She had inherited clarity, boundaries, and a kind of emotional intelligence I didn't learn until I was almost 40. At the very back of the binder was a single sheet of thick paper. On it, handwritten in dark, deliberate ink, was one line. "Some people don't deserve forgiveness, just consequences." I looked up at her. She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. Just clear. I wanted to say something profound, something motherly and wise, but all I could do was nod. Because she was right. We had both spent years hoping things would be different, that my parents would one day realize how much they'd overlooked, how much they'd hurt, that they'd finally say what I'd waited my whole life to hear. We're sorry. We see you now. But they never did. And maybe they never will. And yet, here we were, standing on the other side of that silence, still whole, still together. Sophie started college that fall, double majoring in economics and behavioral psychology. She said she wanted to understand why people do the cruel things they do, and how to stop them. She took Grandma's old calculator with her, the one missing the 5 key but still functional in her hands. It sat on her desk beside a photo of the two of them, arms around each other, laughing over spreadsheets. As for me, I never called my parents again. I never answered their letters either. I still get one every few months, the handwriting tight and urgent. But I stopped opening them after the first line of the first one read, "You misunderstood everything." No, I didn't. I understood exactly what happened. And I chose to walk away from it. Sometimes, people beg you to keep peace, simply because they benefit from your silence. And the greatest act of love you can offer yourself and your child is to stop making yourself smaller just to make others more comfortable. We didn't need their money. We needed their presence. And when they couldn't give that, we learned how to build without them. Now, every time I pass the hospital where Sophie had her surgery, I think of that moment, not the fear, not the rejection, but the choice. The choice to stop waiting. To act. To believe that love, real love, shows up. Even if it comes from strangers with worn-out checkbooks and warm hands. Even if it starts with a single word, yes.